$20 billion of public and philanthropic finance to help them do it. We also secured a commitment from the world's biggest traders they would stop buying commodities grown on legally deforested land. And at Cop27, world leaders who made the pledge are gathering again to report back on progress and agree next steps.
Daisy Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Environment Act was passed nearly a year ago, but we still don't have the strong secondary legislation that we need to regulate the use of forest risk commodities in the UK. Ministers are yet to decide which commodities should be regulated, and under every single one of their own scenarios, the government would not even manage to halve the UK's deforestation footprint between now and 2030. So with Cop27 starting in just a few days, Mr. Speaker, will the government make a commitment today to bring in regulations that apply across all items that pose a risk to forests, and will they promise to do so within a year?
Well,
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady raises an interesting point. Of course, I'm just new into the post of Secretary of State for DEFRA, but spent 3 years there working on these sorts of projects. I want to assure her that we are committed to making sure that protection of sustainable forests is absolutely key for this government, and it's why we continue to make sure the £1.5 billion that was specifically earmarked for forests across the current ICF period will absolutely be honoured.
Richard Graham.
Mr. Speaker, a lot of good work was done at COP26 by the then Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Member for Reading West and others to preserve the world's forests. These decisions to participate in the declaration by Southeast Asian nations were not easy because in those countries livelihoods and the environment are closely allied issues. Can my right honourable friend confirm that our government remains committed to working with the countries of Southeast Asia both to deliver on the declarations and to help them with tricky issues like palm oil and sustainability of timber?
Secretary of State.
Well, my honourable friend is right to praise the Right Honourable Member for Reading West in what he did last year, and indeed
It's a very poor example to other countries, let alone us in the UK. And can she tell us who will be driving these important international commitments forward in the future?
Secretary.
Well, indeed, the Prime Minister will be taking the lead on this agenda, and that's recognised, as was announced earlier today. He is attending COP, but the Honourable Lady should be aware. That, of course, this is about an implementation process, but at the same time, I'll remind her that representatives of government are already attending COP, they're already attending the Montreal Protocol partnership, and it's important to recognise, and this particular leadership on forest and land use is a recognition of how nature-based solutions are critical to achieving that, and that's why there are many people from government making sure that we achieve our net zero, but also supporting the global efforts as well.
Sir Christopher Schultz.
Number two, sir.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Homegrown, renewable and low-carbon energy, fundamental to meeting climate targets for every country, are also key components to energy security and independence. As outlined by the International Energy Agency, the alignment of economic, climate and security priorities has already started a movement towards a better outcome, both for the people and the planet.
Sir Christopher Cho.
Mr. Speaker, if my right honourable friend supports self-sufficiency, why is the United Kingdom still importing such vast quantities of liquefied natural gas from the United States, especially when 2/3 of all that gas is produced by fracking?
Minister.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his question. And of course, making sure that we maximise the albeit declining production from the North Sea to this country makes sense. And for those who suggest absurdly, including, has to be said, the separatist party opposite, that spending billions of pounds to foreign countries to supply gas, which we have to have ourselves, rather than producing it in Scotland with Scottish jobs, is, my honourable friend will recognise, frankly absurd.
Caroline Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the context of the climate crisis, self-sufficiency can't simply mean yet more new extraction and burning of fossil fuels. According to the UN, governments still plan to produce more than double the amount of fossil fuels in 2030 than would be consistent to limit global heating to 1.5 degrees. So to help us assess production against climate targets, will the Minister urge all countries at COP27 to join Germany, France and Tuvalu in giving diplomatic support to the new Global Registry of Fossil Fuels, which is designed to help us to do precisely that?
Minister.
Well, I thank the honourable lady for what she said. And of course, it's important in this country to recognise that with the Climate Act, production here of a declining basin, and our production is expected to fall faster than is required for oil and gas around the world. Producing that at home with lower emissions for our gas, for instance, than liquid natural gas is a sensible way to go.
Oliver Hill.
I thank the Energy Minister for agreeing to speak at the UK-EU Parliamentary Partnership Assembly on Monday. And does he agree with me that there's scope for far more cooperation within European nations to ensure energy security and in the short term also to meet the challenge of Russia's war of aggression?
Well, I thank my honourable friend, and he's absolutely right. And we are seeing increasing cooperation. This summer, we've seen electricity exports from the UK while the French nuclear fleet is down. We've seen gas exports from the UK helping fill storage there. And we're looking to renew our cooperation in the North Sea cooperation apparatus. And an MOU on that is expected to be signed soon.
Chris Evans.
We're often told by this government they follow the science. How safe is fracking, and would the Minister want it happening in his constituency or near his constituency?
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for his question, and as the Prime Minister has made clear, the moratorium on fracking has been reinstalled, and therefore it's an effective stop on fracking. Thank you.
Chris Stevens.
Number 3, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With your permission, I will answer question 3, 6 and 9. Delivering net zero is essential to tackling the global challenges facing countries around the world, including the impact of climate change, threats to energy security, the decline of nature and slowing economic growth. Bayes ministers, and as can be seen by ministers represented at the dispatch box today, across government are committed to this agenda.
Chris Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Minister for his answer. A couple of weeks ago, the former Bayes Minister dropped plans to appeal against a High Court ruling that found the UK government's net zero strategy was unlawful after a trio of NGOs challenged the Bayes strategy on the basis that it failed to show how its policies will curb emissions enough to meet legally binding targets next decade. So could the Minister tell us what recent discussions he's had with Cabinet members to ensure legally required information on how Cabinet budgets would be met is available both to Parliament and to the public?
Minister.
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his question and his close interest in these issues. The net zero strategy is government policy, and it has certainly not been quashed. The judge, in fact, made no criticism about the substance of our plans, which are well on track. but he is right. It was about the information provided, and we will respond in due course. In fact, it's notable, Mr. Speaker, that the claimants themselves described our net zero plans as laudable during the proceedings.
Khalid Mahmood.
Speaker, the Treasury has warned of a 50 billion financial black hole. This has been caused by crisis after crisis. The war in Ukraine, inflation, Brexit and the cost of living crisis. Yet oil giants are still making record profits. BP intends to pay around 700 million in windfall taxes in its North Sea operations, more than 3 times the share buyback programme, which surplus cash into the hands of their shareholders rather than renewable investment. Does the Minister agree that this is both ethical, and does they agree that the UK Government should expand the windfall tax for fossil fuel extractors?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, of course, taxation is a matter for Her Majesty, His Majesty's Treasury. The point I would make to the Honourable Lady is, of course, a system which encourages those companies to reinvest in the North Sea and produce gas with much lower emissions attached than the liquid natural gas which we import from abroad is good for Scottish jobs, it's good for our energy security, and because of those lower emissions, it's good for the environment.
Show the committee for Liberty.
As the Prime Minister will no longer be chairing the Climate Action Strategy Committee, what structures working across government departments does the Minister expect the Prime Minister to use to drive delivery of the nationally determined contributions to the COP programme and Net Zero Britain?
Well, I thank my right honourable friend for his excellent question, and as he'll doubtless be aware, we are working across government. It's as represented here today. You can see just how cross-government our efforts are, and the Climate Action Implementation Committee, which met only a couple of weeks ago, and on which I and multiple ministers sit, is very much driving forward, reviewing our carbon budgets and ensuring that we have the policies to stay on track.
Jim Foster.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In his discussions with other Cabinet members, did my right honourable friend reflect on the contribution new nuclear projects such as Hinkley Point C can make to the delivery of the net zero strategy, and how the objections of some to those types of projects mean we simply end up emitting more carbon?
Minister.
My honourable friend is absolutely right. It is bizarre that those who claim to be green oppose the green baseload that is provided from nuclear. And of course, if you take the Separatist Party over there, they with an aspiration of 100% renewables, it is reliant upon the baseload nuclear provided from England. It is not green to oppose nuclear, and that's why we've set a 24 gigawatt target. That's why we're committed to it, and the jobs and the technology that are associated with it.
Chair Secretary of Miliband.
Thank you, Speaker. I want to pay tribute, Mr. Speaker, to the work of the COP President, and I'm sorry he's been removed from the government. And let me take this first opportunity at the dispatch box to congratulate the Minister on bringing down the last government in the vote on fracking. Now, before it fell, Mr. Speaker, that government pledged to end the onshore wind ban in England, changing the planning rules, and I quote, to bring consenting for onshore wind in line with other infrastructure. But the new Prime Minister spent the summer campaigning for an onshore wind ban because of the distress and disruption he says it causes. So can the Minister tell us, is the government's policy to change the planning rules as promised by the last government, or keep the ban on onshore wind as promised by the new Prime Minister?
Minister.
Well, I thank the right honourable gentleman for his question, and I'm delighted, as has been announced today, the Prime Minister is going to be leading our delegation to the COP, and I can tell him that we are working to ensure the speedy take-up of a whole range of technologies across the piece in order to ensure that we can deliver the net zero targets and stay on track.
It is a mad world when the new government makes the right honourable member for North East Somerset look like an eco-warrior, because he was in favour of lifting the ban. And this is just one example of their failure. We're way off track from meeting our climate targets. The net zero strategy was ruled unlawful. The PM sacks the COP president. And all this when the UN is telling us we are heading for 2.8 degrees of global warming. Isn't the truth, Mr. Speaker? This year began with a Prime Minister who made grand promises that haven't been fulfilled, and it ends with one who has to be dragged kicking and screaming even to turn up.
Well, the right honourable gentleman knows that this country, it was the government of which he was part, of course, that had to be dragged kicking and screaming by the Conservative Party to pass the Climate Change Act in the first place. It is this country which, since he left office, has moved us from renewables less than 7% of electricity to more than 40%, has seen the transformation of the energy efficiency of our housing stock, and it is this Prime Minister who will not only lead us at COP, but will take us forward, and we are on track to meet our net zero targets. We will meet our carbon budgets, and it is this party and this government which is the one that has a track record of action rather than rhetoric. And I have to admit, the right honourable gentleman's increasingly good at that.
Number 4, sir.
Speaker, every major report published this year shows progress on bringing warming projections down compared to last year, but we are still far from a 1.5 degrees Celsius pathway. That's why we need to see more countries, especially the major emitters, implement their Glasgow commitments, and I welcome the fact that 26 countries have new or strengthened NDCs as part in response to the Glasgow Climate Pact.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The global methane pledge that emerged from COP26 committed its signatories, including the UK, to collectively reduce methane emissions by at least 30% below 2020 levels by the end of this decade. Can the Minister tell the House by how much has the government reduced UK methane emissions in the year since the COP26 summit, and when will it outline a strategy to meet its 2030 commitment in full?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I will have to write to the honourable gentleman with a very detailed response, but I hope he will welcome the progress that is being made. For example, we have people at the Montreal Protocol Agreement right now, and that's why we also welcome the US government ratifying the Kigali Amendment. It's other measures as well, through F-gases and elsewhere, that will help us achieve, hopefully, that 1.5 degrees Celsius.
James Gray. My right honourable friend not very concerned that the Arctic countries, the temperature is rising sometimes something like 4 times faster than the rest of the world, in some places 6 times faster than the rest of the world. What more can we do to assist the Arctic countries to resist the worst effects of the rise in the oceans and the rise in temperature?
Well, I know my honourable friend has long been concerned about this, and he's right to be so. That's why we'll continue to work with high-level ambition partners and work towards our 30 by 30 ambitions right around the world, which will also preserve the Arctic and Antarctic.
Lloyd Thompson.
Question 5, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Throughout the UK's presidency, my right honourable friend, the member for Reading West, has engaged with all parties, including cooperating closely with the upcoming Egyptian presidency on the issue of loss and damage. Addressing loss and damage will continue to be a priority for the UK presidency in the run-up to and, of course, at COP27.
Lloyd Thompson.
Speaker, the Egyptian presidency of COP27 has hailed Scotland as a leading in the world in taking steps in the right direction towards loss and damage. Scotland's First Minister has called it our moral responsibility to finally acknowledge damage done by developed nations through emissions and contribute towards loss and damage funding. What more can this government do to follow the lead of the Scottish Government in tackling this important issue?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, loss and damage has been and continues to be a priority for the UK COP26 presidency. The Glasgow Climate Pact dealt explicitly with this issue, recognising the urgency of the challenge, and the Santiago Network will enable technical support for countries to understand climate impacts and to plan and carry out action to counter them.
Don't come to topicals, don't come.
Mr. Speaker, if I may, I would like to take this opportunity to put on record my, and I know the whole House's, thanks to my right honourable friend, the member for Reading West, for his absolute and unwavering commitment as COP26 President on behalf of the United Kingdom. His team, led by Peter Hill, have worked tirelessly alongside him and deserve great praise. My right honourable friend has brought the world together, not only raising ambition across the board for net zero strategies nation by nation, but he has built trust and confidence that this can be achieved by driving the global change in the private sector's view of money. In turning investment green, he has been able to drive the commitments of governments and business to make decisions with net zero at their heart. If Paris set the mitigation goal, Glasgow, under his leadership, turned that into real commitments, and he has now challenged the world to put adaptation for resilience at the heart of all that we do, and the Egyptians will continue that work.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome her to her new role. As we all know, Shell are making windfall profits more than double last year, and despite this, not paying a penny of the UK's windfall tax. because of a get-out clause which obscenely incentivises new oil and gas extraction in the UK. When we know drilling more fossil fuels is incompatible with the 1.5 degrees target to avert climate catastrophe, will the government now remove this loophole?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, clearly all matters of tax are for His Majesty's Treasury, but it's clear that all our formerly fossil fuel companies are indeed energy companies, and they are investing incredibly heavily across the piece in renewables as well. We will continue to work with them to ensure that they invest their profits wisely.
Sir Christopher Joe.
Mr. Speaker, when ministers go to the Cop27 conference, will they give the cold shoulder to Germany to show our country's disapproval and disgust at Germany continuing a massive expansion of its use of lignite, which is the dirtiest way of generating electricity?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we will continue to work after the COP presidency has handed over to it with all our international partners to make sure that we continue to work together to find solutions which move to renewables and clean energy.
Matt Weston.
Mr. Speaker, can the Minister just update us on what steps are being taken to reduce methane gas emissions by 2030 in accordance with the global methane pledge set at COP26?
Secretary.
So, Mr. Speaker, as I just said to his honourable friend, I'll have to get the detail and write to him. I'll share the same letter.
Dr. Ben Spencer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This year I've met with pupils at Sayes Court and Manor Primary School who wrote to me about the environment. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that alongside the big, the Glasgow Pact, the small, such as local environmental activism, is also critical to protect our environment, and join with me in being proud of the pupils we have in Runnymede and Weybridge?
Secretary of State.
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right to commend the children of Sayes Court and Manor schools. It is the children who are genuinely the future, and by leading by example in what they do, that's an element of reducing waste. But can I just also reflect, nature-based solutions are actually fundamental to tackling climate change, and as we embrace that through programmes like Eco Schools, that has to be the way forward for him, his school children, and indeed our country.
Fellows.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Pardon me. What recent discussions has she had with the incoming administration in Brazil in seeking to tackle deforestation and clearing of the Amazon rainforest, which are the lungs of the planet? And what considerations has she given to an international preservation alliance where richer countries pay for carbon credits to keep rainforests alive?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, if I may, I will write to the Honourable Lady with more detailed information, but the work that Lord Goldsmith and the other place has been doing as part of the COP26 team over the last 2 years, as set out earlier in questions, has driven work around deforestation and the commodities work, which you continue to do, but I will make sure she has a fuller answer.
Chris Evans.
Whilst, of course, it's admirable to assist other countries in meeting their net zero goals, closer to home, the planning laws mean that polluting companies like a waste transfer plant in my constituency in Cwmfelin are allowed to gain planning permission to build these plants. Will the government reform these planning laws to be mindful of net zero as well as gaining permission against the wishes of the community?
Minister Secretary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think planning is devolved to the Welsh administration, so he may wish to take that up with the Welsh Government directly. But of course, we will always make sure our obligations in improving the environment in this country will be honoured as we take forward any potential reforms to planning.
Mr. Speaker, Coventry is leading the way in the manufacture of electrical cars. Despite this, our Conservative government continues to flip-flop, both on attending the COP27 climate summit, but also in investing in green technologies. So when will this government step up and sign off the gigafactory for Coventry?
Minister.
Well, I thank the honourable lady for her question. We are absolutely committed to the having zero emissions vehicles, and I'm pleased to say have led on that with our 2030-2035 targets now being copied, I noticed, by our European neighbours, and we remain committed and will do so under this Prime Minister to continue our leadership. We've reduced emissions by more than any other major economy, and we'll continue to do so.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Shell and BP
have announced bumper profits, while they've also benefited from a loophole put in place by the now Prime Minister, which means they secure taxpayer support for drilling oil in our North Sea. Can I ask the Minister if he thinks this is a good or bad decision ahead of the Cop27 summit?
Mr. Speaker, I've said repeatedly it is absurd to suggest that bringing in gas, for instance, from abroad with higher emissions attached to it is sensible and paying billions of pounds for that when we can produce it at home. That is why we incentivise investment in the North Sea. It is declining, it is being managed decline, and it is compatible with net zero. And it's about time she backed the British economy and British jobs and didn't play politics with this issue.
Before we come to Prime Minister's question, I'd like to point out the British Sign Language interpretation of proceedings is available to watch on Parliament Live TV. We start with questions. Prime Minister Dame Meg Hillier.
Number one, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Dame Meg Hillier.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister promised integrity, professionalism and accountability in government. His Home Secretary has leaked information, is overseeing chaos in the Home Office and has broken the law. What will she actually have to do to get the sack?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Home Secretary made an error judgment, but she recognised her mistake and took accountability for her actions. But she has now set out, transparently, in detail, a full sequence of events in a letter to the Labour Chair of the Home Affairs Select Committee, offered to share relevant documents with the Chair, and she is now getting on with the job, cracking down on crime, defending our borders, something I know the party opposite has no interest in supporting.
My 19-year-old Congleton constituent, Mary, who has been in care much of her life, has worked long and hard by childminding and in other ways, now faces her university studies with no savings and no means of recovering them because it has all been stolen from her in a few seconds by a heartless scammer pretending to be her bank. What assurance can the Prime Minister give that the government is working hard to help prevent this type of all-too-common, despicable crime and bring the perpetrators to book?
Well, I'm very sorry to hear about Marie's case that my honourable friend raises, and I know how convincing scammers can be and the upset and hurt that they cause. I'm pleased to reassure my honourable friend that the government will shortly be publishing our fraud strategy, which will establish a more unified, coordinated response from government and law enforcement and the private sector to block more scams and to better protect the public.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. His Home Secretary says the asylum system is broken. Who broke it?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, let's just we can look at the record on migration policy. Let's look at it. What did we on this side of the House do? We gave the British people a referendum on Brexit. We delivered Brexit. We ended the free movement of people, Mr. Speaker. That's our record on migration policy. It's not something the honourable gentleman supported. He opposed it at every turn, and it's not what the British people want.
No one wants open borders on this side of the House. They've lost control of the borders on their side of the House. Mr. Speaker, four Prime Ministers in 5 years, and it's the same old, same old. He stands there and tries to pass the blame. If the asylum system is broken, and his lot have been in power for 12 years, how can it be anyone's fault but theirs?
Mr. Speaker, people rightly want to see us getting a grip of migration in our borders. But look, let's look at the record. Let's look at the record. The right honourable gentleman, he voted against the Nationality and Borders Bill. He said he would scrap the Rwanda partnership. He opposed the ending of free movement of people. Look, border control is a serious, complex issue. But not only does the party opposite not have a plan, they have opposed every single measure we have taken to solve the problem. You can't attack a plan if you don't have a plan.
We voted against it because we said it wouldn't work, and it hasn't worked. He says he's getting a grip, he's got a plan. So let's have a look at that plan. The Rwanda deal was launched in April. It cost the taxpayer £140 million and rising. The number of people deported to Rwanda is 0. Since then, 30,000 people have crossed the channel in small boats. It's not working, is it? He hasn't got a grip.
Mr. Speaker, we on this side of the House are clear that we want to defend our borders. When the Shadow Home Secretary this weekend was asked, she couldn't answer a simple question if the party opposite was in favour of higher or lower migration. It's that simple. The Home Secretary and I, when it comes to tackling on migration, reducing migration, we are on the same page. That party's policy, it's a blank page, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, blame others, deflect, attack on something else. So much the new age of accountability. Of all the people who arrived in small boats last year, how many asylum claims have been processed?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we do need. Mr. Speaker, not enough is the answer, very straightforwardly. Not enough. And that's what we're going to fix. But the honourable gentleman raises this question. What are we doing? We've increased the number of processing officials by 80%. We are putting an extra 500 more by next March. But if he really was serious about fixing this problem, then he would acknowledge that we do need to tackle the issue of people putting spurious claims, spurious, repeated, last-minute claims to frustrate the process. That's how we'll tackle the system. So why, then, did he vote against the Nationality and Borders Act, which deals with it?
Mr. Speaker, he says not enough. You could say that again. It's 4%. 4% of people arriving in small boats last year had their asylum claim processed. According to the bookies, the Home Secretary has a better chance of becoming the next Tory leader than she has of processing an asylum claim in a year. And he talks about numbers. They're only taking half the number of asylum decisions that they used to. That's why the system is broken. 4,000 people at the Manston Air Force Base, massively overcrowded, all sorts of diseases breaking out. So, did the Home Secretary receive legal advice that she should move people out? Yes or no?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the right honourable gentleman is very fond of reminding us that he used to be the former Director of Public Prosecutions. So he knows the government's policy on commenting on legal advice. But what I can say is the significant action that the Home Secretary has taken to fix the issue. Since September, 30 more hotels with 4,500 new beds, appointing a senior general to control the situation at Manston, and indeed increasing the number of staff there by almost a half, Mr. Speaker. These are significant steps to demonstrate that we are getting a grip of this system. But this is a serious and escalating problem. We will make sure that we control our borders, and we will always do it fairly and compassionately because that's the right thing.
Here's Starmer. Mr. Speaker, he talks about my time as Director of Public Prosecutions. I prosecuted people smugglers. He can't even get an asylum claim processed. I think the answer to the question whether the Home Secretary received legal advice to move people out of Manston is yes. He just hasn't got the guts to say it. He did a grubby deal with her, putting her in charge of Britain's security just so he could dodge an election. She's broken the ministerial code, lost control of a refugee centre and put our security at risk. She did get one thing right. She finally admitted that the Tories have broken the asylum system. Criminal gangs running amok, thousands crossing the Channel in small boats every week, hardly any claims processed. So why doesn't he get a proper Home Secretary, scrap the Rwanda gimmick, crack down on smuggling gangs, end the small boat crossings, speed up asylum claims and agree an international deal on refugees? Start governing for once and get a grip.
Mr. Speaker, the right honourable gentleman.
Front rows. Can we just calm it down a little? I do want to hear the replies. You're covering your mouth. It's not helpful to me or you. Come on, Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the right honourable gentleman rightly raised the topic of national security because it is important. But this is the person who in 2019 told the BBC, and I quote, "I do think Jeremy Corbyn would make a great Prime Minister." Mr. Speaker, let's remember that national security agenda, abolishing our armed forces, scrapping the nuclear deterrent, withdrawing from NATO, voting against every single anti-terror law we tried, befriending Hamas and Hezbollah. He may want to forget about it, but we will remind him of it every week because it's the Conservative government that will keep this country safe.
To my register of interest. Mr. Speaker, right now we are suffering the worst outbreak of avian flu ever recorded. Hundreds of thousands of birds are being destroyed to stem the spread of this terrible disease. The government's acted quickly to bring forward compensation for live birds culled to 48 hours after confirmation of disease. But even this short delay is causing significant losses to farmers in Broadland as the disease wreaks havoc to flocks. Dead birds are not compensated. Today is Back British Farming Day. Will my right honourable friend take this opportunity to back British farmers and agree compensation for all affected birds from the date when disease is confirmed?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as someone who represents a very rural and farming community, it is a great pleasure to back British Farming Day and join with colleagues on all sides of the House in doing so. But my honourable friend is right to highlight that outbreaks of avian flu this year are on track to be some of the worst on record. That's why we've toughened up biosecurity measures on poultry farms, and I can say to him that we have confirmed we will now pay compensation from the outset of planned culling rather than at the end, a request that I know he and the farming sector will warmly welcome.
Leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In May of this year, the new Prime Minister told this chamber, and I quote, "I can reassure the House that next year's benefits will be uprated by this September's CPI and the triple lock will apply for the state pension." But last week, the Prime Minister repeatedly refused to say if he would keep to a promise that he made only 5 months ago. Prime Minister, people don't need to hear any more spin about compassionate conservatism. People just need a straight answer to a simple question. Will he keep his promise and lift benefits and pensions in line with inflation?
Minister. Well, Mr. Speaker, we do now have an excellent new Chancellor, and I'm looking forward to his autumn statement in a couple of weeks. It wouldn't be right to comment on individual policy measures before then, but I think everyone knows we do face a challenging economic outlook and difficult decisions will need to be made. But what I would say is that we will always, as my track record as Chancellor demonstrates, have fairness and compassion at the heart of everything we do.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it was a very simple question asking for the Prime Minister to reiterate what he promised just 5 months ago. For the second week running, he still won't give a straight answer to the most vulnerable that require support. The Prime Minister keeps telling us that difficult decisions need to be made, but austerity 2.0 isn't a difficult decision. It is what it has always been, a Tory political choice to hit the poorest hardest. In the week that BP saw quarterly profits of £7.1 billion. Why not take the easy decision to bring in a proper windfall tax? Why not take the easy decision to reinstate the cap on bankers' bonuses? Why not take the easy decision to scrap the non-dom tax avoidance? And with all that new revenue, why not stand up today and take the easiest decision of all, to protect those most in need and increase benefits and pensions in line with inflation?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman raised the issue of North Sea, and this is a point of significant difference between his party and ours. As Chancellor, I introduced the new levy on oil and gas companies because I believe that was the right thing to do. But where we will always differ is we believe that our North Sea producers do have an important role to play in our transition to net zero. They are an important source of transition fuels, and we will make sure that we support them to invest in exploiting those resources for the British people.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I firstly welcome the IPU delegation from Madagascar who are in today's viewing gallery. More locally, I'm delighted that next year Openreach will be rolling out ultra-fast broadband in Wigginton in my constituency. But other rural areas of South West Hertfordshire, like Dudswell, are still in dire need of better connectivity. Can the Prime Minister update the House on the progress of the £5 billion Project Gigabit?
Prime Minister. My honourable friend is absolutely right to recognise the role of broadband in providing levelling up opportunities across our economy. That's why we invested £5 billion in Project Gigabit, and now we have 71% of UK premises having access to this from just 5% when we came into office. I'm very pleased to tell my honourable friend that we will be launching a procurement to provide gigabit coverage for his area in the coming weeks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister will know that it's Scotland's energy resources that feed corporate profits and keep His Majesty's Treasury pumped full of cash to the tune of £8 billion in the last 9 months alone. In return, candidates in the summer Tory leadership contest tried to outdo each other in their contempt and hostility to Scotland's democracy. So without falling back on the "you've had your vote" trope, can the Prime Minister tell me, is Scotland in a voluntary and respectful union of equals as claimed in 2014, or are we hostages in a territorial British colony?
Minister. Mr. Speaker, what people across Scotland rightly want to see is both their governments working constructively together to improve their lives. That's what we will do on this side of the House. And part of that is actually supporting Scottish energy producers, which he is right, have a vital role to play in enabling our transition to net zero and improving our energy security, and those Scottish companies will have our full support.
Scott Benson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Nearly 40,000 illegal immigrants have crossed the Channel so far this year, landing taxpayers with a hotel bill of £5.6 million per day to accommodate them. Is it any wonder that millions of people in this country are furious with the situation? Prime Minister, during the summer you set out a comprehensive 10-point plan to tackle this issue. Everybody on this side of the chamber wants you to succeed in this aim. When can we expect the firm action the British people are demanding?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I know this issue is rightly a priority for my honourable friend. It's a priority for his constituents, and I can reassure them that it is a priority for me and this government too. Whether it's the Nationalities and Borders Act or the further measures we are planning to take, we will defend our borders, stop the illegal crossings, and ensure that there is fairness and compassion in our system. That is the way to restore trust, and that is what his constituents and the British people deserve.
Jimmy Stone.
Here. Mr. Speaker, I have a constituent who is a supermarket worker. She's paid full weekly because she receives one double salary payment. There's 1 month of the year where she receives no universal credit. Normally not an issue, Mr. Speaker. However, because universal credit is linked to the cost of living payment, my constituency now no longer qualifies for the £320 that could see her through the very worst of a cold Highland winter. What could the Prime Minister do to mend this gap in the cost of living support?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, what I can tell the honourable gentleman is we also provided discretionary funding, which was provided through Barnett to the Scottish Government, especially to deal with cases like the one that he raised. But we'd be very happy if he wants to write to us with the constituents' details to look into it. But discretionary funding was made available, especially for cases like that.
Great.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was visited at one of my surgeries in Broxtowe by my constituent, Aaron Horsey. In his arms was his 3-week-old newborn baby, Tim. Aaron's wife, Bernadette, tragically passed away whilst giving birth to Tim. Aaron came to see me regarding the disparity that exists over shared parental leave. The current eligibility requirements differ between that of the surviving birthing partner as compared to the surviving non-birthing partner. And this meant in Aaron's case he was not entitled to leave to raise his son. Would the Prime Minister ensure that both my constituent and I can meet with the relevant minister to make sure that we move towards a future where parents are not in this position?
Prime Minister.
Well, I know the whole House will join me in extending our condolences to Aaron following the tragic loss of his wife, and I thank my honourable friend for raising this issue. Employed parents can benefit from statutory support depending on personal circumstances. I'm very concerned to hear that that is not happening in this case, and I will of course ensure that he gets a meeting with a relevant minister as soon as possible to resolve this issue.
Mr. Speaker, will the PM join me in condemning opaquely funded so-called think tanks who exert so much influence on gullible politicians that their policies were able to almost crash the UK economy just weeks ago? Open Democracy reports a former member of the Charity Commission board has called for the Institute of Economic Affairs to be stripped of its charitable status, saying the very purpose of the IEA, shrinking the state, is political. Is it right this body receives charitable tax status? And will the PM meet with me to discuss the influence bodies such as the IEA exert on politicians, including what influence they still have with him?
Well, Mr. Speaker, obviously charitable status is a matter for the Charities Commission, but more generally, I actually do believe in free speech and vibrant debate of ideas. That is a good thing, and we should do absolutely nothing to stamp it out, even when we disagree with it.
Dr. Julian Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the run-up to the autumn statement, will my right honourable friend do everything he can to persuade the Chancellor to assist those people who took out mortgages in good faith and now are at risk of losing their homes through unaffordable increases?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend is absolutely right to raise mortgage payments. It's why it is absolutely crucial that we put our public finances on a sustainable footing to limit the increase in interest rates, because ultimately that is what puts pressure on people's mortgage payments. That's what this government is determined to do. And in the short term, there are support available through the welfare system for those with mortgage payments, and I hope he can direct his constituent to those.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given the continued Russian invasion and the now illegal annexation of parts of Ukraine, will the Prime Minister recommit his government to pursuing the full and proper accountability, including through the International Criminal Court, of those who violate international law in territories that they occupy? And in particular, will he pursue the rigorous application of the 4th Geneva Convention in terms of the treatment of civilian populations in militarily occupied areas?
The honourable gentleman for his question, which is absolutely right. I can confirm we will continue with the policy that the previous government put in place, and I think it's something that we can be proud of, that we provided, I think, the earliest technical support to gather evidence to put cases together for future prosecutions at the ICC. We will continue to gather evidence, provide support to the Ukrainians, because he's absolutely right. What we are hearing is abhorrent, it's wrong, and those who are conducting these things must be held to account.
Simon Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend and I both represent rural constituencies, and he will know the difficulty in securing both NHS dentistry and GPs in rural areas. We on this side of the House know that the financial decisions that he and the Chancellor are going to be taking are going to be tough. Notwithstanding that, can I urge him to ensure that as many initiatives as possible can be supported and put in place in order to make sure that GPs and dentists know that working in rural areas is an attractive place and to encourage their recruitment and retention.
Prime Minister.
My honourable friend is absolutely right about the importance of healthcare provision in rural areas, which our constituents feel acutely because of the distances they have to travel. He has my assurance we will continue to prioritise both dentistry and GP recruitment to make sure that everyone in this country has access to the primary health care that they need and deserve.
Chris Blav.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not going to be bullied into silence by anybody in this House. With the highest peacetime tax rates, food inflation running at 11.6%, mortgage rates rising dramatically, and a £50 billion hole in the public finances, the Prime Minister knows that Britain's broke. What is it about the 12 years of Tory rule and 5 years of him as a minister that has made such a mess of Britain?
Well, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to the economy, the honourable gentleman just failed to mention the single biggest cause of the challenges that we face right now, which is absolutely the aftermath of a global pandemic which has affected supply chains across the world, and an illegal war being conducted by Putin, which is leading to high energy prices. These are the root cause of the challenges we are facing. The challenges we are facing are global in nature. It is wrong to say that they are particular to this country now, and we will, of course, do what we always do on this side of the House, deliver a strong economy for the British people.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In last summer's heatwave, people across Essex witnessed terrible fires. And last month in Ethiopia, I witnessed the horrific climate change-driven drought that is forcing millions of people across the Horn of Africa to the brink of famine. I've discussed climate change with my right honourable friend. I know he cares, and it's great that he's going to Sharm el-Sheikh. But we, the UK, brought the world to Glasgow for Cop26. It's vital that we remain world leaders on climate change. So please confirm this government will fulfil the promises that we, the UK, made in Glasgow.
Minister. Well, can I thank my honourable friend for her work and role that she has played in us championing the fight against climate change. And I agree with her. There is no long-term prosperity without action on climate change, and there is no energy security without investment in renewables. That's why I will attend Cop27 next week to deliver, Mr. Speaker, on Glasgow's legacy of building a secure, clean and sustainable future.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. While the Prime Minister was secretly recorded boasting to friends that he had helped divert money away from deprived areas like Coventry towards wealthy areas, staff of Coventry's hospital are still paying £600 a year to park at work. So when will the Prime Minister stop hammering working people in my community?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think the Honourable Lady was asking about car parking in NHS hospitals, if I understood her rightly. We did introduce temporary free car parking during the pandemic. That was the right thing to do. And now all NHS trusts that charge for parking have implemented our free parking manifesto commitment for those in the greatest need, including hard-working NHS staff who work overnight.
Anthony Bagnall.
Speaker, on Back British Farming Day, will the Prime Minister recognise with all members of the House the important role that farmers take and recognise that public money for public good means producing food in this country? But could he also recognise the value that our trade deals are doing in allowing us to export our high-quality produce around the world, in particular the Australia Agreement, where a member of this House will be able to enjoy a certain delicate cut in his bush trucker trials?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I agree with my honourable friend. British farmers are indeed the lifeblood of our nation. I join him in celebrating their contribution. I agree with him we need to prioritise food security, and he is right to champion free trade deals. They open up new markets and new opportunities for great British produce, and we will continue to open up more markets for our farmers everywhere.
Boris Sherman.
Mr. Speaker, can I welcome the first Prime Minister from Yorkshire for a very long time? but and I'm trying to be kind to him this morning. Isn't it the fact that since he resigned as Chancellor of the Exchequer on the 5th of July, we've had the most turbulent economic and political disaster in our country than any of us can remember? And when he reflects on that, will he also think why, when he was the Chancellor of the Exchequer, he did not help ordinary working people as well as he could? Yes? And can he now take the opportunity to tax the non-DOMs, who are 70,000 of them, that are getting away with avoiding tax? And will he bring in a tax on windfall profits on the gas and oil industry?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very proud of my record as Chancellor in this country. And maybe the honourable gentleman could talk to the 10 million people who had their jobs saved through furlough. Maybe he could talk to the millions of those on the lowest incomes who benefited from the changes we made to universal credit. This will always be a fair and compassionate government that has the most vulnerable at our hearts. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With only 2 out of 10 autistic adults currently in employment, it's clear that much more needs to be done to realise their potential. Will my right honourable friend work with me to make sure that business and industry help close that alarming employment gap?
Well, I know this is an area that my right honourable friend rightly champions and knows an enormous amount about. I look forward to working with him closely to get his recommendations on how we and industry can improve the lives of those who need our help.
Sarah Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Leader of the Opposition asked the Prime Minister who broke the asylum system. He dodged the question. The truth, Mr. Speaker, is that the backlog is now so great, decision-making so collapsed, and returns so low, at 1/10 of what they used to be, that the criminal gangs have a business model to die for. Whose fault is that?
Mr. Speaker, the reason we are in this situation is because of the unprecedented number of people arriving here illegally, often from safe third countries. Now, if the party opposite was really serious about this, they would realise that we have to stop illegal migration, that we have to stop the exploitation of vulnerable people abroad. But they have opposed every single measure we have taken. They're not serious about this problem because they don't think it matters.
Tom Hunt.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. Both myself and many of my constituents remember fondly the Prime Minister's visit to Ipswich when he was Chancellor of the Exchequer. We spoke about levelling up, and he made it clear to me levelling up isn't just about one part of the country, it's a national mission. Therefore, does the Prime Minister agree that a great way to show people of Ipswich this would be support of our levelling up fund bit to get Ipswich active? £18 million, £15 million for Gaines Resort Centre, £3 million for the outdoor Lido in Broomhill.
Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is right. Levelling up is about spreading opportunity in every part of our United Kingdom, ensuring people have pride in the place they call home. I look forward to seeing his Levelling Up Fund bid, and I know it will be being considered over the course of this year, and I wish him every success.
That completes Prime Minister's questions. Just let all. To order, Afzal Khan.